Greetings to all Motorsport-Magazin.com friends and Formula One enthusiasts. The training day in Las Vegas wasn't incredibly spectacular, yet it was intriguing. As car enthusiasts, the most thrilling part for us is both on and off the track. But before delving into the excitement on the track, let's focus on what was happening away from it. As usual, there was the team principal's press conference between the first and second free practice sessions, and Toto Wolff was one of the people who took part, and we were waiting for him quite eagerly because Mercedes isn't doing so well at the moment. Today we have a different topic, I promise, and we'll discuss that as well. But in both sporting and interpersonal terms, you might even be asking yourself the question, are things not going so well at Mercedes this year? In sporting terms? Sure, out of the question. Lewis Hamilton had a disastrous weekend in Brazil. 10th place in extremely difficult conditions that used to suit him well, but even in dry conditions, nothing went right for him, as heard from his radio communication after the race. It almost gave the impression that he was interested in an early end with Mercedes-Benz, as he will leave Mercedes at the end of the season and move to Ferrari. The question is whether things might get messy between Mercedes and Hamilton. On one hand, there's the sporting misery we saw from Lewis Hamilton in Brazil, his comments over the radio there. On the other side, Toto Wolff's comments have surfaced, taken from a book called Inside Mercedes F1. In this book, the people involved talk about the last few years. They talk a bit from the inside of Mercedes, and of course Toto Wolff as well. There are a few quotes that don't sound too great regarding Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton decided at the start of the season to leave Mercedes and switch to Ferrari. Wolff mentions this might prevent the moment we have to tell the sport's most iconic driver that we want to part ways. He further explains that there's a specific rationale behind opting for a 1+1 contract agreement. That sounds somewhat like, well, then we had to wrap it up. The reason why Hamilton could depart from Mercedes swiftly is due to the advantageous 1+1 arrangement. Mercedes was also a signatory, having the convenience to do so as well. Toto Wolff reiterates this, and there has also been circulation of a corresponding quote, "We are in a sport where mental sharpness is extremely important, and everyone has a shelf life or expiration date." This can certainly be interpreted, especially after the performances in Brazil, as if Lewis Hamilton has passed his peak. Toto Wolff defended himself today, saying it was all taken out of context. He praised Hamilton's 99 comments, and then something like that was included. And they also speak to each other regularly and have an agreement that if something doesn't go well, they will call each other immediately and sort it out. However, the statements he made remain consistent with those reported in the book. And I believe you can extract whatever you want from the context. They aren't particularly positive. Toto Wolff mentions that he sets this bar not only for the drivers, but also for himself and the whole team. Everyone has an expiration date, and you don't want to drop from great to good. Moving from highly skilled to moderately skilled drivers is also part of the transition from great to good. Everyone must constantly put themselves to the test. Yes, on the test stand, or at least on the test bench at Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton would have liked to be there, especially in Abu Dhabi after the season finale. The tyre test takes place on Tuesday. Although Lewis Hamilton is not typically known for enjoying tyre tests, the prospect of starting early with Ferrari may have interested him. However, it seems that this possibility is not going to materialize, since he is still with Mercedes under contract. Toto Wolff said, "Well, there are contractual obligations to sponsors, and that's why Lewis Hamilton isn't driving for Ferrari." The situation at the press conference was amusing, since Fred Vasseur sat right next to him. They are very good friends, yet Toto Wolff did not let Lewis Hamilton go for his friend Fred Vasseur. Although Vasseur permitted Sainz to depart for Williams, this fact remains unchanged. Fred Vasseur then tried to categorize it a bit. Yes, just because we're doing it doesn't mean that the others don't have to give a damn about the contract and so on. And then Toto Wolff slipped out a bit and he said, well, he goes to Williams with the motto, "That's not a competitor. We and Ferrari are competitors, but in the end there are contractual obligations and so on. So they're not doing Lewis Hamilton any favors. There's no farewell gift." A farewell gift, however, will be given at least on training Thursday or Friday, depending on which time zone we're in Las Vegas. Twice, Lewis Hamilton set the fastest time. He said it was the first time this year that he had a day where everything just went really well. By now, one or two viewers may already know, this year we have already witnessed impressive practice times from Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, indicating their consistent dominance in qualifying and on Fridays. These strong performances have become a regular occurrence for the team. Then they totally fall apart. Yes, Lewis Hamilton is aware of this too. However, if my research is accurate, it's at least the first time Mercedes has been at the front in both the first and second free practices. They've usually been strong in one session, in the other, they were bad. Maybe they were good in the second and third free practices, but in the first and second, they haven't managed that in this way before. Yet they are only cautiously optimistic, even though they had a 1-second lead in the first free practice with Hamilton in first. Russell was in second, and the whole thing was nearly a second ahead of third place, so that was quite a statement. In the second free practice, it became tighter. Despite this, Lewis Hamilton still lacks complete trust in it. He mentioned, "Let's see if the car is still the same tomorrow," so that's already going a bit in the direction that things are no longer quite right between Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, but I would still say that, despite the challenges of the season, things are still going relatively well in the public eye. However, reading between the lines, it's evident that they are eagerly anticipating its conclusion. So, what's Mercedes' performance like now? Are we expecting the same as usual this season? Strong in practice, then weak when it counts? Russell says no, he doesn't believe that. It's unfair to say Mercedes is good in practice and then takes a step back. He disagrees, stating that the competition employs deceptive tactics, deliberately underutilizing power and fuel resources. Now you could argue that, alright, the Mercedes either loses ground or simply doesn't have enough in reserve. Regardless of how you perceive it, the outcome is consistently unchanged. But what's the situation in Vegas now? Does Mercedes still have reserves? Russell believes it looks a bit better since the lead is significantly larger. That lead is quite substantial, and we haven't seen that on other weekends. So we're excited to see how Mercedes will perform. Of course, it would be nice to see Lewis Hamilton on a high again with Mercedes. The victory in Silverstone was superb with fantastic visuals. However, for a neutral F1 fan, witnessing how things went in Brazil was truly painful and disheartening. Now let's discuss the current world champion, Max Verstappen. He was only 17th in the second free practice, and his teammate Sergio Perez was in 19th. You may be familiar with that from Perez, while Verstappen has not shown such behavior. Indeed, Vegas may not be the perfect place for the RB20, placing them in the 17th position. Be careful, the lap time was set on the medium tires. Verstappen did not complete a proper test on the soft tires. During his initial attempt, he erred and had to abandon the lap. Subsequently, he recharged the battery, but an unfortunate red flag was displayed, leaving him unable to make a noteworthy second attempt. So, we don't really need to consider the overall result, but it still didn't look particularly good for Verstappen. He stated that the balance was okay, but the tire just didn't have any grip. That's extreme. You see that quite often in Formula 1. When the gaps are so huge, it's usually not so much down to the setup or somehow the driving behavior, but simply because of it, you just can't get the tire into its temperature window, can't get the tire to work, and that's why you suddenly lose so much time. That's definitely true for Max Verstappen. In race trim, he says it runs well. So for one lap, it's a disaster. They need to get something out of the tires. In race trim, it functions properly. Low downforce is an issue. We noticed that with the Red Bull RB20 in Monza, perhaps the weakest weekend of the season, and this is when the unpleasant characteristics of the Red Bull become more pronounced. He had to learn this again live with Sergio Perez. For him, it's that he already had balance issues, less with the tire. But this could also be related to the fact that the car had to be trimmed extremely. There's no perfect wing for this low downforce setup, and that's why it's somewhat brainwashed, if I can put it that way. But in race trim, as I said, it's really good, and that trim is quite important in Las Vegas. We'll talk a little more about the racing trim in a moment, but first, let's talk about this lovely sweater. It's getting cold outside. I've already driven to the office here today in snow flurries. The temperature here in our studio isn't very warm either. Of course, the Motorsport-Magazin collection is just ideal. This nice hoodie, for example, could soon be yours. We have a wide variety of items available in our shop, including a fantastic t-shirt and many others. Shop.motorsportmagazin.com if you want to stay cozy or give your loved ones the best gifts for Christmas. Let's talk once more about race trim and qualifying trim, using Ferrari and McLaren as examples. The situation is quite diametrically opposed. On one side, McLaren's Lando Norris, second place in the second free practice, just 11 thousandths behind Hamilton's best time, looked really good. Oscar Piastri was a little further behind, only in 8th position, but he was also unable to complete his second timed lap, on which he would have improved significantly due to the red flag. But short run. Lando Norris was not satisfied at all after this practice day. You'd think, okay, a close second, close behind, stopping at the very end. Could he actually wave happily at the camera? Nope, not at all. He says, The long run was an absolute disaster, and the data actually shows that. At first, the McLaren starts off quite decently, but then it deteriorates significantly, and not just for Lando Norris, but also for Oscar Piastri. The problem is tire graining. This is related to the renewed challenges in Las Vegas with extremely low temperatures and poor grip levels. Compared to the other cars, it appears that the McLaren struggles a bit more in these conditions. And as for Lando Norris, he held a condescending attitude. He admitted, "I am unable to accomplish this task, not only in regards to the car itself, but also in terms of my ability to handle these conditions." So, he isn't very hopeful for McLaren's chances in race trim, at least as race trim plays a critical role. Over the track, there is a possibility for overtaking to occur. We have 1.9 kilometers of full throttle straight. Half of that is a DRS zone. It will be quite challenging if the tires begin to grain, and a car that usually has less tire graining this season is the Ferrari. We've observed that again. The true strength of the Ferrari lies in its race trim, its incredible durability. When it comes to graining, it outperforms other teams, showing fewer difficulties, particularly on the front axle. However, as we mentioned yesterday, the cold weather is posing difficulties for Ferrari in achieving optimal tire performance this year. Furthermore, this fact has been corroborated today. That's why Sainz is in 4th and Leclerc in 5th, but those positions are in quotes. They were 3 to 5 tenths of a second behind on a lap. But then in the long run, they were there. They were actually the fastest car. And that's actually an optimal position to start the race, considering that the cars which excel in qualifying might have a slightly slower pace during the race and vice versa. So at the moment, I can't pick a favorite. I'm curious to see what you think. But now let's take a closer look at the technical side of things. Every Thursday or Friday, I find myself in a state of confusion, as we are presented with a list of updates from the FIA. However, this time the updates were exceptionally intriguing. Naturally, there are numerous updates specific to the Las Vegas track. A low downforce package, the front wing is adjusted, and more. Additionally, there were some other intriguing items. We were astonished by the unveiling of a brand new floor at Ferrari. Later, Jock Clear clarified that the floor is freshly installed and intended only for Carlos Sainz during the initial practice session, serving solely as a testing article. This is really just for the correlation between wind tunnel and track. We want to test it. Afterward, everything will be checked again in the wind tunnel so we can develop better for next season. Therefore, the intention is not to upgrade the vehicle using this floor or to establish it as a lasting feature. Instead, its purpose is solely for correlation purposes. Then, the Racing Bulls introduced a new rear axle. This was already announced. It arrived a bit later than last year. They received the new rear axle in Singapore. What does received mean? A new rear axle. The Racing Bulls acquire these components from Red Bull Racing. These are purchased parts, known as transferable components, as the regulations say. These parts can also be sourced from a competitor. The link between the Racing Bulls and Red Bull is clear. They aim to enhance the synergies all along. But this scenario is occurring, only notable with the stated rear axle. Since it's a central component of the car, swapping it mid-season holds considerable significance, despite the Racing Bulls downplaying it to some extent. But this means the gearbox casing, the full rear suspension, and the aerodynamics must be adjusted too. This means that the fairing in the wishbones, the control arms have been changed, the rear brake cooling has been modified, and the engine cover has been adjusted to fit everything. Last season, there was a major performance increase in Singapore, which led to a lot of complaints about this entire model. Today, in free practice, we haven't observed this performance leap yet, but Las Vegas may not be the ideal track for it. There's an interesting update at Sauber too. A brand new floor is indeed being put into use. Everything has been altered. Fences, edges, body and diffuser. Everything a floor provides. The performance seems quite satisfactory. Bottas seems to be performing better compared to the previous time, although this improvement might be attributed to the low temperatures. However, caution is still necessary. A major topic we discussed yesterday was Technical Directive TDO Dynamo and update number 10, the skid blocks. Unfortunately, this is not listed in the FIA's list of technical updates. It only includes aerodynamic updates. This means that if someone changes something mechanical, like the rear axle on the Racing Bulls, it doesn't specify the rear axle or suspension components, just the fairings, which had to be fully changed. However, it has been admitted. These skid blocks, which might have needed modifications for some teams, are unfortunately not included. Of course, this was also a topic in the team principal press conference, and I was surprised that the team principals answered honestly. So, they really like to lie to our faces, but Oliver Oakes, Fred Vasseur and Toto Wolff have all confirmed that yes, they had to. As a result of this technical directive, they had to modify their cars. Fred Vasseur reiterated that the FIA had said our car was legal, so he doesn't fully understand. However, he wanted to avoid conflict, which led to the decision of taking the pill. Consequently, Ferrari, Mercedes and Alpine have been confirmed, while it is speculated that Haas is also impacted. The big question is how much this actually matters. One can argue that Mercedes was in first and second place. They haven't been performing at such a high level throughout the year. I am not convinced that there is a connection between the two factors. We should patiently wait for the race, as there is still the possibility to lower the adjustments of the car. For one lap, it's not an issue. I don't have the wear, but I must survive the race setup. And then I need to have minimal wear on the underbody, otherwise I will be disqualified. So, we can draw a cautious conclusion at the earliest after the race. Yes, I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Who will take it? Who do you think is the favorite? Can Mercedes maintain their Friday form? Thursday's form into Friday or Saturday, depending on where we are? Is Red Bull going to make a strong return? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and you can follow everything as usual at motorsport-magazin.com or simply visit www.motorsport-magazin.com. If you don't want to do that, it's best to download the app, which is available free of charge for Android and iOS, and then simply click on it and enjoy all the news, enjoy the ticker, configure push notifications. You won't be missing anything.